Hi, fourth graders. So today you're going to need your Orphan at Ellis Island book in your packet and open up to chapter 24 and 25 questions. Because we're going to start with correcting those, and then we'll read, and then you do have some homework to do, okay? So go ahead and get your 24 and 25 questions out. All right, so our first one was actually question number 5. We needed to know, why did Signora Giusulo drape a black silk in the front doorway? Remember, that showed that somebody had died there. The black silk in the doorway showed somebody had died. What do you think the bishop thought of the boys? This one could have had a few. We talked when we did our reading yesterday. You might say, I think the bishop thought the boys were gross or smelly or not well taken care of or just not the most well behaved, right? Like sticking a finger into the jam. Lots of options there. Number 7. What made Francesco and Father Tommaso so angry, and then we said this one should say while, W-H-I-L-E, boarding the boat? Francesco and Father Tommaso were so angry because Violetta could not be let on the boat because she was an animal. So they were upset with the ticket guy or the guard who wouldn't let them on. 8, you had to kind of infer a little bit. Why did it seem as if Violetta knew what was happening? Well, if you remember at the end of chapter 25, towards the end when Father Tommaso was walking away, she kind of like tilts her head like in a knowing way. She's like, I gotta leave. What? And then she's kind of looking around the crowd. Remember when Dominic and Francesco get up to the top of the boat and they see her kind of looking around at everybody? Another reason there. Number 9. Father Tommaso scolded Francesco. When we talked about that, he yelled or got angry. Why did he scold Francesco? Because Francesco wasn't thinking of Antonio and himself. He was thinking of the goat. He needs to start thinking of Antonio and to his needs more than the goat's needs. Number 10. List the instructions Francesco had given Father Tommaso to take care of Violetta. So you should have said on chapter 25, page 132, he said, let her sleep near you at night, Father, and don't let her eat bad weeds. Be sure to rub her nose. That was the last direction he was able to give because then the ship's whistle drowned him out. And the last question you had, why does it seem like Dominic is so sad? Because remember at the very end of chapter 25, Dominic, why does it seem like he's so sad? What's happening? He's reminiscing, right? Thinking about all the happy times that they had spent together, the Candiano boys and Violetta, and he whispers goodbye. Usually if we whisper something, we're like, oh, so sad. So, lots of reasons there to know that Dominic is feeling sad. All right. So, we're going to read 2 chapters again today, 26 and 27, and then we'll look over those homework questions. All right, chapter 26, let's get started. All steerage passengers down these stairs, a voice barked. Dominic and Antonio were quick to follow the harsh command, while Francesco seemed to be in a daze. Together, they found themselves in a crush of people, boxes, and baskets. A man with a thick mustache groaned as he heaved a heavy bundle onto his back that nearly knocked Antonio over. A baby wailed in Dominic's ear as an old woman leaned beside him, breathless under the burden of her parcels. Everyone pushed forward. At the bottom of the stairwell, men and boys to the right, women and girls to the left, families to the far end, came the second command. Maybe it's better that we're down here, a woman in front of them said. At least this way we won't feel the cold night air off the sea, and it will be drier. What does it matter where we have to stay? The man beside her answered, as long as we get to America. Yes, we're finally going to America, voices called out excitedly behind them. Going to America. Dominic repeated the words with a smile. He couldn't wait to show Francesco and Antonio his homeland. He couldn't wait to show them the streets he knew and let them taste the food he liked. He imagined them all sharing a double fries and a couple of burgers. He wanted to do everything with them. Watch television, trade baseball cards, and play hockey on the street. Do they really have electric lights in all of the buildings? He heard a voice break into his daydream. Of course they do, someone answered. It is 1908, and it is America. 1908, Dominic whispered under his breath. It wasn't going to be his America that they were sailing to. It wouldn't be as he remembered at all. What would it be like? What was ahead of them? He wondered. So is Dominic going to be able to do all of those things he wanted with the Antonio and Francesco? Probably not, because it's not his America. What was ahead of them now was a stairwell, and as they made their way down into the dark, cavernous room, the crowd grew quiet. We're never going to fit in here, Dominic thought as he looked at the black iron framework that divided the hundreds of narrow bunks. Each section had 3 tiers rising from a bare wooden floor. Thin straw-filled mattresses covered each bunk. There were no pillows. Some bunks had thin, dirty blankets, but many did not. A bucket serving as a chamber pot was placed near every tier. What do you think that means? A bucket serving as a chamber pot was placed near every tier. The bucket is what you got to use the bathroom. It was like your toilet. So you had that bucket near every tier. So near every couple bunks, there was one chamber pot, one toilet, and it's just a bucket. Does that seem like a good place to stay? I don't think so. The boys found a set of bunks they could share with Francesco. Antonio took the bottom bunk and Dominic climbed up to the top. When Antonio complained that he was hungry, Francesco gave him a piece of bread that he had saved from the night before. The other bunks had filled up by this time, and there was a loud echo of voices as people tried to make themselves comfortable. Dominic laid his head back on the rim of the thin mattress and closed his eyes. As eager as he was to explore the ship, he couldn't help but give in to the exhaustion he was feeling. But the moment he leaned back, his eyes popped open. "Ugh, what stinks?" he groaned. "It's the straw in the mattress," a man in a bunk beside him answered. "When it gets old and wet, it begins to rot. Try not to think about it. We'll be in America soon." But soon stretched out for days, and the stink of the moldy mattress was replaced with far worse smells. Almost everyone had brought food with them, and what was not immediately eaten had begun to spoil. The heat of so many bodies cramped together in such tight quarters, with no ventilation, so in other words, no air, right? There's no windows, nothing. It's just like being in a closed-off room, gave way to such an awful stench that by the 3rd day, the boys were forced to find relief on the open deck. Although the air was clean, with a fresh breeze blowing off the ocean, it was also cold and damp. After they inspected as much of the deck as they could, climbing over great coils of rope and ducking under long lengths of pipe, they looked up at the well-dressed passengers strolling on the 1st and 2nd class decks. Once, as they were staring up, a woman threw down an orange to them. Does that remind you of anything? It reminds me of the books we read before where they talked about how sometimes the 1st class passengers would send down food to them, like the apple in the story we read before. But unlike those 1st class passengers dressed in fur coats and heavy wool sweaters, Dominic and the others only had the shirts on their backs to keep off the sea's clammy breath. So they soon discovered that they could keep their warm if they pressed against the ship's giant smokestacks. Huddled together, there were a half-dozen other boys. They traded stories about their dreams of living in America. They talked about how Francesco and Antonio would live in New Jersey, while Dominic lived in New York. They hoped that one day they would all live together. Francesco grew quiet whenever they mentioned animals, so Dominic tried not to talk about the pets he hoped they could one day have. He knew how much Francesco was missing Violetta. Dominic hated to think of having to leave them, but he was glad at least that he was returning to New York. He promised to save up his money and come and visit them every chance he got. But these conversations would come to a sudden end when the weather turned bad and they entered choppy waters. With little warning, The ship would suddenly lurch up into the air on the crest of a billowing wave and then come crashing down on the water surface. Soaked from the spray and terrified of being tossed overboard in the heavy gales, they would all scramble back to the safety of the steerage dormitories. On one such day, after returning from the smokestacks, Dominic found himself covered in a film of black grime. Unaccustomed to such filth, he suggested they clean up at the washrooms. "There are only 2 rooms for this," Francesco said limply, handing over his bunk. "And look around you. There are hundreds of us. The lines are so long. Why bother? We can wash when we get to America." "But this is disgusting," cried Dominic. "I can't stay this dirty until then. Besides, I thought you wanted to look good for America." "I do. But for now I am feeling too sick to think of dirt. Everything seems to be moving. Maybe the dirt will move off me as well." How do you think his stomach's kind of feeling? Kind of nauseous. He's probably feeling very seasick, right? From all the moving and up and down of the boat. "Well, I can't stay like this," Dominic announced, climbing down from his bunk. "I'm going to try one of the washrooms." As he walked on the sticky, splintery floors, he thought about his old sneakers and how much he missed them. After waiting in line for what seemed like hours, he was finally able to move past the wooden partition of what was called the washroom. "A bathroom at last," Dominic muttered, stepping forward. "Ugh," he gasped, covering his nose with his hand to keep from breathing in the horrible stench. The sight that met his eyes was unlike the worst bathroom he'd ever been in. The bare wooden floor was sticky with waste, so meaning with people's stuff they've used, either vomit or poop, covered only by a thin layer of dirty sand that clung to his bare feet. There were no sinks, no towels, no toilets, and no toilet paper. There were only buckets. Wooden buckets filled with salt water to wash in, sitting beside buckets filled to the brim with urine, waste, and vomit. If he hadn't felt sick before he entered the washroom, Dominic certainly did when he left it. Whoa, now think back. A lot of us in class said, "Yeah, it'd be worth it to take that journey." Now that we've seen a little bit more of what the conditions are like, would you still want to ride that ship to America? Maybe, but it would have been rough in 3rd class. All right, our last chapter for today, chapter 27. When he returned to the bunks, Dominic found Francesco and Antonio talking about what they wanted to be when they grew up. "When I grow up in America, I want to be a very fat man," Antonio said, puffing out his cheeks. "That's funny," Dominic told him. "Most people don't want to grow up to be fat." Why do you think Antonio wants to grow up to be fat then? Because he's never been able to have his fill of food. So he's like, "I want to be fat. That means I've had too much food." "If I am fat," Antonio explained, "I can live for a long time without food. My stomach won't hurt, and I'll never be hungry." "I think even fat people get hungry," Dominic told him. "When I grow up in America, I will have a big house and a big family," Francesco declared, "and my firstborn son will be named Salvatore." They all grew quiet at the mention of Salvatore. After the 5th day, their conversations turned from what things they would buy for each other to what kind of foods they would eat. For their meals now consisted of the hard biscuits and smelly gray soup that the crew served from big wooden tubs. By the 2nd week, even the drinking water that the ship provided tasted so bad that many people refused to drink it. "I can smell tobacco in it," Francesco said, making a face as he took a drink. "And I can taste it too. They must have reused the cask." Dominic winced as he spit out the foul-tasting liquid. "I think we're getting sick from this water. Our stomach cramps started right after we drank it." He thought of Salvatore and his stomach pains. Nervously, he remembered how quickly his life had ebbed away. Would it be the same for them? Once again, the old man's words came back to him. Your courage is there, right alongside of your fear. Was there enough courage there to see him through this nightmare? As afraid as he was, he also began to feel angry. Why doesn't someone complain? He muttered. They shouldn't treat us like animals. Complain? Francesco repeated from the bottom bunk. Who to? The shipping company? And what do you suppose they would do? They'd put us off at the next port. Or maybe they wouldn't even wait. Maybe they'd just open the hatch and give us a good shove. Did you see how some of the sailors treat us? To them we are no better than dogs. No, it's not wise to complain. We need to get to America. And if that means we must drink dirty water, then that's what we'll do. I just hope we don't die before we get there, Dominic moaned, clutching his cramping stomach. His eyes began to wander about the room, and he looked from bunk to bunk at his fellow passengers. He could read the exhaustion on their faces, the weariness in their slack jaws. He could see the sickly green tint to their complexions, the white of their knuckles as they clutched the iron bars of their berths. He could hear the moans and groans, the prayers, the lamentations that accompanied each loud creak of the ship's wooden walls. But try as he might, he couldn't hear anger, the anger that he would have expected to accompany such miserable conditions. No one was demanding his money back. No one was threatening to sue the shipping company. They seemed to accept the misery as part of their payment to reach America. He tried closing his eyes, but that only made the continual rocking seem worse, and the stench grew stronger. This lasted for the remainder of the trip, until the days and nights began to run into each other, and he had lost all track of time. And then, on the 15th day, word came down to them that land had been sighted. Hoots and cheers filled the air as the exciting news was passed from bunk to bunk. High spirits spread through the ship like wildfire. People kissed, hugged, laughed, and cried. They had spotted land, American land. With trembling hands, Francesco shook Antonio awake. America, Antonio croaked, rubbing his sleep from his eyes. Are we really going to see America? Yes, Antonio, Francesco laughed as he pulled out 2 shirts from his cloth pack. And we are going to look our best for our new country. Francesco and Antonio changed into their clean shirts. Then Francesco reached into the sack and pulled out the remaining one. Everyone grew quiet at the sight of it. Dominic looked down at the small worn shirt in Francesco's hand, and he knew what the others were thinking. He knew they were thinking of Salvatore, and how he should be here to wear the shirt and to see America. Go on, Francesco said, holding the shirt out to Dominic. Put it on. Salvatore would have wanted you to wear it. Dominic quickly undid the little wooden buttons. He slipped his arms into the sleeve. He knew that if he were to wear such a threadbare garment in his own time, kids would really make fun of him. But as he looked down at the stained shirt now, and tried to smooth out the wrinkles with his dirty hands, Dominic felt as if he had never worn anything finer. Think about that. There's kind of some conflicting views there. Why do you think kids today, or in Dominic's time, would have made fun of him? Well, it's got like stains, it's wrinkly, it's threadbare, meaning it's really thin. Does that show? What does that show if you wear shirts like that? That you're usually kind of poor, right? And they make fun of him for not having nice stuff. So then why does Dominic feel like he's never worn anything finer? Probably because it's such an honor for him to get to wear it, right? It was meant for Salvatore, but Salvatore's not there, so he's like, I get to kind of honor Salvatore by wearing this shirt, and that makes me feel amazing. And I'm also getting to go off of the ship and be in America. So that is also something that makes him feel extra special. And that's where we're going to pause for today. Okay? So, let's take a look at our homework. So the next page is chapter 26, 27, 28, and 29 questions. So we're just doing the 26 and 27 questions. So numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So just that first side, because the back side is 28 and 29. So only 1 through 11 is your homework to do. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, see you next time.